Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So, Fresh Red Kills is where I talk about the books that I recently finished reading. And I have three books to talk about. There's E.L. Doctorow's Ragtime, a academic primer on zombie cinema, and Stephen King's The Cycle of the Werewolf. The first two I actually finished on December 31st, 2022. So these are the last reads of 2022. And this one I read either first or second day after the new year. So talk about them in the order in which I finished them. First, I finished E.L. Doctorow's Ragtime, originally published in 1975. And this is a book that I've had on my shelf unread for literally decades now at this point. I know I had picked it up as an undergrad when I was getting my degree in history. It was in connection with a survey history course on American history, and I was usually really good at reading and finishing things that were part of classes. But for some reason, I just didn't necessarily finish this one, and I couldn't remember why. The idea of it really intrigued me. It's sort of historical fiction, but not exactly. It starts off in 1906, and it goes for about 10 years or so, basically to the dawn of World War One, and it has historical characters. I mean, it's real historical people. Evelyn Nesbit, Emma Goldman, Booker T. Washington, J.P. Morgan, Henry Ford, Harry Houdini. They all make appearances here, but they're put in a lot of fictional situations. And sometimes nonfiction situations are kind of put in different orders, not exactly when they happened, but more to narratively coincide with other things. And all of that sounded really interesting. And I know that it was really popular when it came out. It seems to be a very well-loved book. I saw that just in this past year now, in 2022. I remember seeing the New York Times was doing kind of like a book club thing on this. And I remember reading some of those articles a few months back. And as it says, I know it became a musical, which I haven't seen. I think it was also a movie, which I haven't seen, but I think that they're supposed to be pretty decent. But for whatever reason, I just hadn't gotten to this. And then when I started rereading it, I kind of remembered why. I hit a brick wall over 20 years ago, around page 50 or so. I couldn't get into E.L. Doctorow's writing style. And I have to say, the first half of this book, I still had a hard time getting into it. I think what he's doing conceptually is very interesting, but I just didn't find the writing itself interesting. It felt like it was a lot of telling rather than showing. The chapters that are in here are kind of ironic. They move so fast, which is kind of strange, because he quotes Scott Joplin in the very beginning of this, who says, "Do not play this piece fast. It is never right to play ragtime fast." And it just felt like everything was moving way too fast in this book. It felt like, there's times when I try to put on a movie, and it hasn't happened very often, but it has happened, where maybe I've accidentally turned on the audio narration for the visually impaired. It's like so-and-so, goes to the door. They see this. And that's kind of how this felt at times. I had a really hard time getting into his writing style. And the different threads that he's creating were so disconnected, and I couldn't really see what the point was in a lot of them. It's not like one straight narrative. It's more like a bunch of threads that start to collide and intersect really in the second half of the book. And we do have some, historical people inside this first half, but a lot of it concerns Evelyn Nesbit. And I didn't necessarily think that he did all too much interesting with her. And there's a really weird scene where Emma Goldman gives Evelyn Nesbit a nude rub down. And then a guy falls out of a closet holding himself, and then spills his DNA on them as he's falling. I couldn't tell if that was meant to be funny But he has Evelyn Nesbit basically dating the guy afterwards, so apparently she thought that was okay. Weird choices in the very beginning of this that I just didn't connect to. He does end up introducing a fictional character who's fairly interesting. He's an African-American musician, a pianist, who is a target of racism, and he kind of becomes something of a firebrand insurrectionist in New York City, in a very fictional situation, but using real buildings, that you could still visit today inside New York. I did enjoy the second half of the book more than the first half. So my enjoyment of this did increase as it went. Ultimately, though, the way that a lot of the stories kind of came together and intersected, I didn't necessarily find satisfying. And I just wasn't as enchanted with the book as so many seem to be. And I feel like I'm a target audience for this sort of thing, but it just didn't work on me. It was okay. That's what I'll say. It was okay. I didn't mind reading it. I'm glad I read it. There were definitely parts that I liked. There was a particularly good scene between Henry Ford and J.P. Morgan. Excuse me, like a fictional encounter that they had together. This conversation is a very strange conversation. We do get some of Henry Ford's very real anti-Semitism shining through. So it was interesting, but I kind of wish I liked it more. That's about it. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Ragtime. That same day, I finished this slim volume. It's less than 150 pages. There are no images, but essentially Rutgers University puts out these quick takes. And this is the second one that I've read as far as horror movies are concerned. I think these are kind of designed for like undergraduate courses to introduce them to topics in, I guess, horror cinema for the most part. I think I had read one about monsters about a year or so ago, which was okay. And this one also is okay. Ian Olney, he tackles zombie cinema. It's not like just a list, a chronological list of zombie movies. That's not what it is. It really tries to dissect zombie movies, or at least show them in a way that makes it clear how they are, showing the times or maybe challenging the times. He has it split up into three different parts. The first part, he is looking at early zombie cinema, like the first half of the 20th century, when it was still very much rooted in racist attitudes, coming, from notions about, or misunderstandings about Haiti and voodoo. Zombification was, excuse me, very much coded as, as black. And that's the section that I didn't necessarily agree with him on, when he starts talking about how he essentially reads those films as critical of colonialism. That the real terror is the white deathliness of the white people who are being taken over. And I just read those films differently. I see it more as, contemporaries finding those films horrifying because those things were happening to white people. No, I think that was the scary part for people. Anyhow, I don't want to get too much into it, but it was, to me, the one that was less convincing. He then goes on to look at the zombie cinema's criticism of capitalism. I thought that was a pretty strong section. And then the last part, he really looks at zombie cinema as it relates to challenges to patriarchy, and especially allowing people, necessarily, mostly women, to find companionship and love outside of the narrowly defined avenues within patriarchy. Take that as you will. But it was okay. Again, I didn't mind this. I didn't agree with every single thing, but I thought that it was a really good primer, at least, if people wanted to explore zombie cinema in a more theoretical and, a way in which you can use cinema to examine culture. And that's one of the things I like about horror studies, is it often can be a very good window into the fears of society at any given time. So, again, another one that was okay. And I'm going to end with a book that I also thought was okay. There's a theme here. So we've got Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf. I think this was published in 1983, I believe. And it was supposed to be a collaboration between, again, I'm guessing this is who it was supposed to be originally, too. So Bernie Wrightson, who I guess was supposed to make like a calendar And Stephen King was going to write like little short snippets of a story to go along with the images of the calendar. So every time you went to a new month, there'd be a little new section of the story. But I guess Stephen King found that a little bit too narrowly defined. So instead, it kind of became a novella. And it is split up between months. So there are 12 chapters for the month. So we got July, and then we'll get kind of a cool black and white illustration, kind of usually a nature scene of the season. But we also get some cool werewolf images, people being attacked. And even the shape of this kind of reminds me a little more of a comic book or a graphic novel. So the story itself, it was adapted to the movie Silver Bullet back in the 80s, one that I used to love that movie growing up, and I showed it to my son about a year or so ago, and I still enjoyed it for what it was. I still think it's a decent movie. It's solid. And I do think that movie improves on this. A lot of the first half is just werewolf killings. That's all it is. You're introduced to somebody, and the werewolf kills them. And sometimes those are pretty well done. Those scenes, some of them are a little bit ridiculous in some ways, but finally we're introduced about halfway through to Marty, a 10-year-old, I think, boy in a wheelchair, who becomes our protagonist and our hero in the story. And that stuff is pretty decent. I kind of like that. Stuff with the brother, sorry, not the brother, his uncle, Uncle Al. That stuff was fun, who becomes the only person that really believes him and gives him the kind of respect that he needs. Either he doesn't coddle him because he's handicapped, and he's not angry at him like his sister is. So I like that stuff. I thought that was all pretty good. And the person who the werewolf is, I think, is a really interesting avenue to take the werewolf story. So overall, again, it was okay. It gets better as it goes, but it's very much a novella. It's very surface level. We don't really get much depth to any characters. So it's fun, and especially when you put it with the illustrations, it's a lot of fun. But it's a quick read that, again, it's okay. If you want like a quick werewolf story, this is perfectly fine. There was one image in here that I really liked, actually, that I thought was great. And if anybody doesn't like gore, you can kind of look away right now. But I thought this was a great picture with the snow coming down and the werewolf chewing on the corpse on top of the semi truck there. I thought that was an awesome image. So again, it's kind of a mixed bag. The writing is okay. The story it's decent. The illustrations are cool, and all that amounts to something just like all the rest that is okay. So here are the 3 okay books that I read. We've got E.L. Doctorow, Ragtime. We've got Zombie Cinema, and we've got Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf. If you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.